I hope you have come up with some solutions. I sincerely hope so. In any case, presentation by Mr. DeVore have provided us with some concrete answers to overcome the current complex situation. For instance, how the science is communicated, people's awareness and support political will, and so on. I think these are very important items we should look more deeply into. Meanwhile, the reality is not so easy. I will show you an example we experienced in Japan last year, especially at the Central Environment Council, which I am a member. As you know, there has been a huge debate in Japan on the use of nuclear power. How much we rely on nuclear power affects the level of CO2 emission reduction targets in Japan, at least in the short term. So we had a long debate on how much emission reduction is likely to be economically feasible under certain conditions on the use of nuclear power plants. So this figure is one of the calculations conducted by some of my colleagues at my institute in IES. Those figures are used as references for such debate. And we did so many calculations from a technical feasibility. But on the other hand, we have very little discussion as to how much emission reduction Japan should aim at from ethical or normative point of view. Science is there. Many people in Japan do believe that climate change is a threat. However, I hear many people in Japan saying that they have already taken the responsibilities because they are already energy efficient. This logic might not work at international level. I guess one of the reasons we are still making small progress at international institutions is that our mindset is still on the 20th century type of multilateral governance system, including UN system. Again, this is not limited to climate change regime. So why don't we start from imagining a global governance system at the end of the 21st century? So that is why I put up this figure. You should remember that many of the things which are illustrated in this movie actually happened before year 2001. So let us imagine what kind of international governance are likely to happen maybe years from now. Perhaps all the international meetings like this might be held by virtual participation using devices similar to Skype. We might do away with heavy multilateral institutions like the UNFCCC. Rather, each individual's rights and obligations could be described in a small electronic card. Why not? I think all the audience here today who are involved in this ESG debate are the ones who would be able to come up with such an illustration of how the 21st century type of governance should look like. And then we can backcast that image to realize in which direction we should evolve our current institution into. So this is my last slide. In my last slide, I'd like to raise 3 main points that could become important elements of the 2015 agreements under the Durban platform process, but at the same time common to many other multilateral institutions that exist today. The first point is about the Commonwealth Differentiated Responsibility Principle, CBDR. Currently, this CBDR is expressed under the climate change regime by dividing countries into 2 groups, namely Annex 1 and Annex 1, or by the level of ambitions of emission reduction target. But I think these are not the only options. So my question to Mr. DeVore is, how do you think this CBDR principle should be reflected in the future climate change regime? This is my first question. The second point is related to transnational activities of subnational actors, including industries, NGOs, etc. The current legislation deals only with emission targets and policies at national level. What are your views on setting some commitments for some sectors, local authorities, or even for the individuals like us here today. For instance, like in all the debates related to international bunker fuel, I think that is kind of an initial debate on setting some targets at sectoral level across all countries. Setting a carbon tax across countries to all the people around the world might be another option. The last point I'd like to raise is trust building or confidence building. As the various actors at various levels become increasingly fragmented, it will be more difficult to monitor their activities, perceptions. We will not be sure whether we are going on the right direction. Meanwhile, building a heavy MRV process, this is a short version of monitoring, reporting, and verification process, would not be an answer. How we can appropriately acknowledge scientific evidence of climate change and turn it into action. So these are the three questions I'd like to raise here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for a very interesting presentation and three important questions. So with your first question related to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which is at the heart of the Climate Change Convention. I think that's probably one of the most abused concepts that I'm aware of. And I find it interesting, and I do not criticize you for it, but I find it interesting that you, like so many people, only recite half the sentence. Because the sentence in the convention actually talks about common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. So the principle in the convention relates not only to how much you contributed to causing the problem, but how much you can contribute to putting in place the solution. And in that sense, I think the capabilities part of it is very important. Common but differentiated responsibilities is not static. If you were to look at the response, if you were to go back in time 20 years and look at who had caused climate change, you would say the United States and a bunch of others. If you were to look at historic responsibility today, you would say the United States, China, and a bunch of others. Because emissions are increasing around the world, the gases stay up there a long time, and historic responsibilities are changing as time progresses. Yes, it's important to recognize historic responsibilities, and it's important to take responsibility for the problems that you caused in the past. But I actually think that that second part of the question of the sentence, respective capabilities, is more positive and the one perhaps on which we should focus. In other words, to my mind, the focus of the future climate change process, recognizing responsibilities of the past and allocating targets accordingly, but the future process should be very much focused on the respective capabilities and on boosting the capabilities of countries not only to cope with the impacts of climate change, but to change their economies in a more significant or a more sustainable direction. So focus on the capabilities. You then talked about sectoral targets and subnational goals. Well, I remember when we as Europeans went into the Kyoto climate change negotiations in 1997, Europe wanted agreement on policies and measures. The Americans wanted agreement on targets and timetables. We got agreement on targets and timetables, and then the Americans walked away. So I would be quite happy actually to see a return to an approach on policies and measures, and I think that there are very good things that you can do internationally to set common standards, for example, in steel production.